Just about every middle school and high school student has a cell phone. But now, just about every school has a policy on how and when they can use them. On today's Mom Squad, we sit down with a governor who just signed a law requiring schools to create restrictions.
I think in school, it is something that interferes with education.
And when it comes to getting in contact with your child during an emergency, a national safety expert explains why cell phones might pose a danger.
If we see cell phones that are not only disruptive to the instructional aspect, but they're being used for bullying, cyberbullying, setting up and arranging fights, increasing agitation, things that lead to a physical altercation.
And we get more advice from Dr. Lisa Demore, why she says unplugging during the day will help your child. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle. We talk a lot about kids and cell phone use, probably because it's become a major part of their lives and ours. It's how we get in touch with them when we aren't together. It's a tool that they use for learning. But it's safe to say the majority of cell phone use is social, which is fine unless it's a distraction. That's something schools across the country have been grappling with for years. Many teachers compare hallways from 10 years ago to now, and they say kids who are allowed to use cell phones don't talk during class change, unlike the noisy hallways they had a decade ago. In today's episode, we are taking a deep dive into how schools are making big changes to cell phone policies in their districts, how many states are making it a law to restrict cell phone use, and whether or not you need to be concerned about their safety. First, we wanted to hear from parents about what they think.
I would say yes to cell phones in school. Maybe they should be limited during some period of time. But overall, I would love to stay in touch with my daughter when she's in school.
I feel like teenagers should have their phones in school due to safety reasons, but I also feel like middle-aged kids, as far as my son, like 10 and 9, shouldn't have their phones in school because it's a big distraction.
Our generation made it through just going to the office to make calls. I think it's appropriate to be able to check it periodically, but I think it's a distraction in schools, and they shouldn't be worried about their cell phones and social media. They should be worried about school.
I do want my daughter to have a cell phone because I want her to, be in a safe place, and I want to know where she's at all times. But as far as like during education, I don't play that when it comes to that. So if you can lock them up, lock them up. If you can't, it's best to, you see what I'm saying, just to leave them at home. Because you're there for your education. You're not there for like social media and entertainment and all that.
Porque hay más control de lo que se graba dentro de la escuela y también los estudiantes no se distraen a la hora de coger clases.
Because it gives like a better control of recording inside schools, and students are more not distracted by learning.
So as you can see, some parents are all for restricting use of cell phones during the day. Some are concerned about what happens in an emergency. But kids aren't just using their phones for emergency calls during the day. A recent study from Common Sense Media found that every student surveyed said they used their smartphone an average of 43 minutes during the school day. They got around 59 notifications on their phones while they were at school. They also reported that policies about cell phone use in their classrooms weren't always enforced. Across the country, parents are getting surveys or asked to weigh in during PTA meetings because a big trend is to ban cell phone use at a state level. Last year, Florida became the first state to legally require public schools to ban cell phone use during class time and block access to social media on their Wi-Fi. Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb also just signed a bill banning cell phone use in classrooms for the fall. California, Oklahoma, Vermont, Utah, Tennessee, and Kansas have legislation in the works to also ban phones during instruction time. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine just signed a new law requiring schools to create a policy restricting cell phone use. I sat down one-on-one with him just before it was finally passed through the state legislature. So, Governor, thanks for sitting down and talking about this. Now, you mentioned about how you were in favor of a ban of cell phones at school during the school day. Why do you think that this is important?
You know, I talk to teachers and they tell me that when their cell phone's even near the student, it's a real distraction. And I think we know this from our own experience. You know, if I had a cell phone on right now, I might be you know, focusing on it every couple of minutes, and that's just what happens. So it's a distraction. We also know that these smartphones, you know, really contribute to some of the mental health problems that we're seeing among our young people. We don't know how much of it, but certainly some of it is. So having a free period of time during the day when we don't have that as a distraction just makes a lot of sense. We want our kids to do as well as they can do in school. We want them to pay attention. We want them to be focused. This is one way to help them be focused.
So is this an educational issue or is it a mental health issue, or both?
Well, I think it's just from, you know, the big picture, it's a mental health issue. But, you know, this is something that I think parents have to address. You know, it's the same reason that the Lieutenant Governor and I supported a bill in the legislature that really would make sure that kids could not use social media at a very young age without the permission of the parents. The parents want them to do it, then that's the parent's decision. We want that to be a parent's decision. But I think in school, it is something that interferes with education. I remember what our high school principal once told us many, many years ago, long before cell phones, and that is, he said, look, if there's something in this school that's interfering with you learning, he says, we're going to be concerned about it. He says, if it doesn't interfere with, we're not going to be that concerned about it. He says, we're here to learn, and anything that gets in the way, we're going to pay attention to.
So with this legislation that's been proposed, there's been mostly support, but a little bit of criticism, saying that this should not be a law, maybe some government guidelines. Why do you think that maybe this should be a law?
Well, there's been several bills that have been introduced. The one bill that, candidly, I think has the most chance of passing in the legislature would leave it up to the individual school. And I'm fine with that. But what it would require is that the school actually have a policy, that they go through the decision-making process, and that they communicate that to the parents. Every school needs to be on record, one way or the other, about what their policy is in regard to phones. I know that parents have a concern about being able to reach their children, but there's other ways during this school day for them to be able to reach their kids. But schools will be able to work this out. But it's enough of an issue that I spent part of my State of the State speech talking about it. And you know, one of the things that a governor can do, short of any legislation, something a governor can do is to talk about issues. And I think this is an issue that needs to be talked about in every school board, talked among parents. This is something that directly impacts their kids.
This isn't, Ohio's not the only state that is considering this or has legislation that has been proposed and is being talked about. Other states are also talking about, you know, some sort of regulation within schools. Have you talked to any of the other governors in any of those states about what's on the table and what should be proposed? Well,
I think all the governors are certainly looking at this. There's been a handful of states that have actually banned them in school. Again, I think that, you know, we all see the impact of these smartphones and what they do. It's kind of interesting. Several teachers have told me, he said, you know, when we actually banned them even during the lunch hour dramatically changed. Instead of kids looking down like this and on the phone their whole time they're eating lunch, they're actually talking to each other. They're laughing, they're engaging, and you know, again, that's something that is part of education too. Is the interaction between students. And lunch break or whatever is a great opportunity for them to do that. And if they don't have the cell phones, you know, they're going to be much more likely to do that. Yeah. We want kids to be kids.
Right. Well, and this is Ohio's future workforce too.
Yes, the kids are our future. I mean, I spent my entire State of the State speech, I think I surprised a lot of people, talking about children. and what we can do to make sure that every child can live up to his or her God-given potential. That's what we want for our own kids. That's what Fran and I want for our kids, now our grandkids, and one great-granddaughter now. What do we want for them? We want them to live up to their potential, find something in life that they have a passion for, and have the tools to be able to do that.
You cited specifically Dublin schools just outside of Columbus, and I know that some of the teachers and administrators also talked about the difference that they've seen in not just the lunchroom, but the hallways and kids learning. Are they an example of what is possible once cell phones are not a distraction?
I think it's always good to look at, if you have a proposal, look at where that has been implemented. So I think, there are schools in Ohio where it's been implemented, and I think the best way to find out how that's working is to talk to the teachers in those schools. And I think most of those teachers are going to say this is the right thing to do. What is difficult, I think, for teachers, and one of the things they've expressed to me, is if the school doesn't have a policy, and it's up to that individual teacher to make a policy about cell phones. So then you got one teacher doing one thing and another the other, and then the kids are saying, well, Miss So-and-so does this, and why are you taking the phone away from me? So I think it needs to be a building-wide decision and carried out and enforced building by building.
I think we can all see where teachers and administrators are coming from. They don't want kids to be distracted during class time. The issue of cell phones being a distraction in schools is something Dr. Ken Trump, a nationally known school safety expert, has been studying.
With a PhD in education, Dr. Ken Trump remembers when the first cell phones started to pop up in schools.
And cell phones were originally banned in schools. You can't have it. It was associated oftentimes in the early years with gangs and drugs and bad things. So we had originally started out with bans of cell phones in schools. Then there was the pivot to the horses out of the barn. It's hard to manage this. Let's look at them as educational tools.
He's watched cell phone use evolve to the almost constant attachment kids now have.
And now we're talking about complete bans. But cell phones are disruptive to the educational environment. You simply cannot pay attention fully to the classroom teacher, the instruction, what's going on when you're worried about getting your latest text, your latest message, your latest information on TikTok or other social media. So there's that competition for the brain space. We have to remember that the executive function of the brain with kids does not develop until the mid-20s. There's research that shows the brain does not fully develop its executive function, the prefrontal cortex, until the mid-20s. So that social trigger is going to supersede any other brain message that's going on over classroom instruction or other things. If the kid's triggered by that social brain trigger, that dopamine, that ping that's going to cause that kid to divert their attention. So without a doubt, it's disruptive. We see cell phones that are not only disruptive to the instructional aspect, but they're being used for bullying, cyberbullying, setting up and arranging fights, increasing agitation, things that lead to physical altercations. So there are many downsides. But cell phones are a double-edged sword. They are positive side, they can be instructional tools.
Trump doesn't envy the teachers. He says enforcing restrictions will cause an even bigger issue if teachers aren't supported.
As a parent, one of the biggest challenges and the biggest pains that I have, like any other parent, is managing cell phone behavior, cell phone safety, cell phone appropriately used, simply just not texting me during the course of the day because I'm working and you're supposed to be working as a student. Parents are also guilty in part of this because they text their kids and want some type of instant response, even if the kids aren't communicating with them. So it's just a mess in terms of managing it. The question really isn't whether we need a law. Schools can implement and have implemented their own policies. The question is, how does it work day to day? How are you going to enforce it? How are you going to discipline the kid? Are you going to increase the battles?
And the big question, will a ban even work? Kids are pretty smart.
If you make the rules, you have to enforce it. Behavior without consequences is permission. And if you don't enforce your rules consistently and for the long haul, then it's just another rule that's out there that's not going to be followed. So the key is, are you for school districts, are you willing, once you set the policy, to consistently enforce it, to deal with parent pushback if that happens here and there, to deal with the battles with the kids when those happens, and do you have the political will as much as the administrative will to follow through with this, not just today when you create the policy, but months, weeks, and years ahead. And that's where we tend to lose it. People, one teacher will enforce the rules strictly, another one won't. Somebody will let one kid off one way and the other one wants to be firm. Kids see the inconsistencies. And we also see kids who look at some of those things as the challenge. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars for pouches up on a wall that could be spent for instructional purposes, could be spent for other security or social, emotional, mental health, safety reasons. And kids are putting their cell phone cases in there. They're bringing dummy phones to put in there while they have their phones there. I've talked with a parent and a student yesterday about this issue, and teenagers tell me we can have the pouches up on the wall. For some kids, that's a challenge. We're putting in the case for the phone and not the actual phone to see if the teacher will check it. We're bringing a dummy phone, a second phone that we can drop in there to look like we're doing it. So there's always going to be that challenge, and some kids are going to work around. The other piece of that is we may ban the cell phones, but kids still have Chromebooks. They bring in MacBooks or other types of laptops to school, so they find workarounds. So I don't think we're going to ever have a complete 100% ban. If schools wish to set a policy, my recommendation is if you set the policy, enforce the policy, do it firm, fair, and consistently, and do it for the long haul. Be willing to take that parent who pushes back and stay firm with the parent as well as the student, and to make sure that your staff are consistent across the way.
Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about all of you parents who say you want to be able to reach your child in the unimaginable event of a school shooting or lockdown. I have to admit, it was my first reaction when thinking about my own kid not having a cell phone in school. But this is Dr. Ken Trump's expertise. And after the break, he tells us why cell phones could actually put your child in danger.
While a cell phone meets the emotional security needs of a parent, it can make their child actually less safe in the moment of an incident because they're paying attention to the phone.
Welcome back. That was Dr. Ken Trump, a national school security and safety expert. He's been telling us why he thinks cell phones are a distraction in the classroom. But what about an emergency? Most of us would instinctively reach for our phone to text our kids if there was a lockdown. But Ken says parents need to really think about what kind of extra danger that can pose.
We want kids 100% attention on the directions being given by adults who should be and hopefully are trained on how to respond to an emergency when that critical incident happens. When kids are on their cell phones, texting their parents, answering calls and texts to see, are you okay?
Dr. Ken Trump travels the country advising school districts on how to improve their security and what to do in case of emergency. When it comes to cell phone use, he thinks kids are putting themselves in more danger by texting with you during a lockdown.
Live streaming things that are unfolding, that draws sound, it draws attention, it draws the person with ill intentions to where those noises, the pings, the sounds are heard, and it's taking away from the attention of the kids to be quiet, to follow the directions of adults, maybe to shift to a different location or take some course of action that could save their life. So while a cell phone meets the emotional security needs of a parent, it can make their child actually less safe in the moment of an incident because they're paying attention to the phone, they're responding to messages, sending messages, possibly even live streaming it. They're not listening to the adults who should be trained to give them directions. One of the most important things when you lock down a classroom is not only locking the doors and getting kids out of line of sight, but silence, so that you don't attract the sound of the noise in the room to the ears of the gunman or the person with ill intentions and let them know somebody's in there. We have to remember, if somebody's in a school with ill intentions, they have a limited amount of time. If you're on cell phones making noises, making calls, getting pings, hitting record, you're attracting some noise to a room where someone with ill intentions may not even know that you're in there, and you're taking away the attention of each of those kids from that adult who could give them an instruction to save their life in that moment.
Ken knows this is very logical, and if there's a tragic situation unfolding, most parents and kids will throw logic out the window in favor of communication.
And the parents are sending those back. I know adults who've been in that situation in lockdowns in schools where they have texted family members and said, we have a lockdown, something's going on in the school, I love you. And these are the adults who work there. These are the adults who are with the kids. So we get that, we understand that. And the hard part is we have to get parents to understand that as much as we understand why parents want that emotional check-in and want to know that their kid's okay, the unintended consequences could be that it's actually making them less safe. And you have to have those conversations prior to the crisis.
But if a school goes into lockdown, Ken says he's seen parents actually get in the way of emergency services.
Schools go into lockdowns for many reasons, the most common being police activity out in the neighborhood. But when they do, kids are on their cell phones with parents. Parents end up flocking to the scene twice as fast as they normally would, and that creates a security problem to manage them as well. So when a simple, I won't say simple lockdown, none of them are simple, but you can have a lockdown for something outside of the school in the community, such as police activity, where there's not an immediate threat to the school, but the cell phones automatically trigger parent flocking to the school, and now school officials not only have to protect the kids and keep them safe, but you have to deal with dozens of parents who are unseen, who are afraid, who may be locked out of the building themselves. They're angry, anxiety is going up, and it makes the situation even harder to manage. Educators not only have to manage the lockdown, even when it's something outside of the school, such as police activity, but then cell phones and texting and digital communications are bringing parents flocking to the school when we don't want them there. We need them to stay away from the area for their safety and for the safety of the kids. So that's created a whole other issue. When we train schools now not only to have an emergency plan on how to deal with threats and lockdowns and other type of situations, but they have to have a crisis communications plan that almost has to go into effect at the same time, running side by side with your emergency plan.
Ken says the key to any sort of rules around cell phones or safety is communication and execution. He says schools need to communicate with parents and kids efficiently, and most importantly, enforce the plan. Otherwise, it won't work for anyone.
In just a few minutes, Dr. Lisa D'Amour is back. This time, we ask her the other big question we got from parents regarding a cell phone ban. What if my kid has anxiety? What she says will help your child the most.
Well, over the last couple of episodes, we really put Dr. Lisa D'Amour to work. We talked with her in depth about teen emotions. If you didn't catch those episodes, you can check it out on our Mom Squad YouTube page. But we also wanted her to weigh in on a question we get a lot from parents. If schools ban or restrict cell phones, what will that mean for my child who has anxiety? As usual, Dr. Lisa was extremely insightful about your child's development. So let's talk about cell phones in schools. This is a topic that has come up. Ohio has legislation on the books. They want every school district to come up with their own policy, but to restrict cell phone use, at least during instructional time. Yep. Coming from a psychologist's perspective, is that important for kids and their educational development?
I think it is a wonderful idea to not have access to cell phones during the school day. It's not a perfect solution, and many of us are accustomed to being able to reach our kids during the day. But when I talk to educators and when I talk to other psychologists and I talk to people who really study this, there is huge value in having kids step away from their phones during the school day. It definitely helps them learn and focus. It also probably calms down their overall central nervous system because it's just less input they are trying to metabolize while also taking in all of the input of the school day. We also worry at times that having constant access to a cell phone gets in the way of emotion regulation, building the skills to deal with uncomfortable feelings. So if kids could take a nice 6 or 8 hour break from their phone during the day, they will continue to build those skills. We don't need to worry about that so much. And school, of course, is a place where a lot of feelings come up, and it gives kids a lot of opportunity to learn how to handle uncomfortable emotions, to do so in the presence of caring adults. There are very few downsides to taking phones out of schools, and there are many, many upsides.
The pushback that seems to be coming from parents, they'll say, well, my child has anxiety and they need to get in contact with me during the school day. Should that be a concern if a child for some reason has some sort of emotional need to get in touch with a parent?
There are certainly situations where I could see that a clinician would say this is a necessity, at least in the short term. But things like anxiety we're actually very, very good at treating. And the goal, if a person suffers from anxiety, is that they actually develop a skill set for learning to manage their own anxiety and to do so autonomously. So even if it's something that's offered in the short term, it should be seen as a short-term solution, while ideally that young person is helped to develop the capacity to breathe through their anxiety, to bring it under control, to challenge their own thoughts, to think about the situation in a way that's less anxiety-provoking. Our goal as adults is to help kids become increasingly independent of us. And that also means, as much as it may be hard for us at times, emotionally independent. And so it doesn't have to happen all at once, and it can happen with the support of skilled clinicians, but the goal over time should be that a young person can manage the range of emotions that do come up during a school day. I think that the key here is just to not confuse uncomfortable and unmanageable. Uncomfortable is part of life, right? It's part of being a human. There are things that are unmanageable, and we don't ask kids to do them. So there's no perfect measure that applies to everybody, but when we come to questions like, does this child need a phone over the day? I think the first thing we should ask is, well, is the situation uncomfortable or unmanageable? And if it's uncomfortable, we can work with that.
There's some policies where it says, some schools are trying it this way. Lock it up in a pouch. They do not have access to the phone all day. Some other schools are talking about, well, they'll have to like check it at the door or even just have it face down on their desk. But I heard a teacher say that there is an impulse, like an uncontrollable impulse, and I feel like we do it as an adult to check the phone. If the kid does not even have it within their reach, are we fixing maybe a long-term problem of that impulse to constantly be connected and to constantly check a phone?
Here's what we know. If you are in a room with a phone, because we are all so attached to our phones, some degree of your energy is going to resisting the impulse to check the phone. So if we think about us having mental bandwidth, we only have so much mental bandwidth. Some of that bandwidth, we have research showing, will be taken up with resisting turning that phone over. If you're trying to learn calculus, you need all your bandwidth, right? So I don't think that's helping. And this research, it's so clear to us that we have some studies showing even while sleeping, if there's a phone in a room, you do not sleep as well, because even while sleeping, we think some energy is going to not engaging with the phone.
Wow.
So you are absolutely onto something, that if we're gonna say no phones, it's actually a greater gift to kids to take it all the way out so they don't have to put all that work into resisting it. The other thing I hear from kids when I ask them about this, they say, if it's an across-the-board rule, if nobody has their phone, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. The issue is worrying about missing out. If no one's engaged with it, we're all good. They only worry, well, if some kids can have it some of the time, then it becomes really complex and they don't want to give it up. But what I hear from kids is, if it's across the board, they can understand it and they can work with that.
Another thing we talk about a lot is the interpersonal skills in the development. And if a hallway is silent because nobody's talking to each other but they're texting, how different is that from a hallway where kids are walking through and interacting with one another, person to person, face to face?
It's really important to spend time doing garden variety interpersonal interactions, reading tone, reading facial expressions, watching body language. This is part of how we learn as humans. At the same time, when kids are drawn to their phones, it's not because they have poor willpower or poor character. The apps on these phones are designed by brilliant engineers to be as compelling as anything that has ever been created. There is a ton of engineering that goes into the design of these things to make them irresistible. So I would never fault teenagers for wanting their phone and looking at their phone when they have access to their phone. That is totally understandable. Side by side with that, there is real value in creating times when they are away from their phones and don't have to make the choice, and nobody else has them either, and they can just be together.
Yeah. Of course, with any kind of mental health issue or concern, it's always best to get a plan from a doctor. But if your child doesn't suffer from a medically diagnosed condition, hopefully her advice on unplugging during the day was helpful to you. So we delved into a lot when it comes to cell phones in schools. Again, this is going to be a hot topic throughout the summer as more and more school districts and states consider restricting use. We want to know what you think. You can join us on the Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle Facebook page. We are also now on Instagram. And you can catch all of the episodes on your Mom Squad YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right back here next time.